So we're going to start our unit on production systems. We're going to kind of give a quick overview of each system. Next semester, if you take Aquaculture 112, that whole course is about production systems. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty details of how to manage these systems and stuff like that. But this is for, again, broad overview, so you're familiar with the major types of production systems used in aquaculture. So ponds. This is probably the kind of oldest form of aquaculture, digging a hole in the ground, filling it up with water, or taking a natural body of water, lake, pond, and putting animals in it. When we look at, if you look at the background here, this is kind of your typical large-scale catfish pond or something like that, where they're built what they call levee ponds, where you push the dirt up and make barriers between each one, and they have specific parameters that we're going to go through. Some of the terminology that you'll see is a levee or a dike is what separates each pond, and we're going to talk about harvest basins and the different features of a pond. Inflow gate is where the water comes in. So this is often coming from a well, or if you're at a big farm like that, sometimes when you harvest a pond, your water goes into a ditch or somewhere else and gets pumped from one pond to the next. But most of the time it's coming out of some sort of well or other water body. And some ponds are just sort of flat bottomed and don't have a lot of slope to them, or some just have a little bit of slope to one end, but don't have a harvest basin and you just harvest with a net. Others are designed so that you can drain the entire pond through a culvert into a big pit, basically, where you can harvest everything in one place. Basically, instead of trying to catch all the fish out of the pond, you just drain them out and they all fall through this other basin where there's kind of grates to keep everything in one place. And that's true for fish ponds and shrimp ponds and other types of ponds as well. So to build a pond, first thing you want to do is find a good site. It usually starts off very flat, and you're looking for a lot of clay in the soil. Why would you want clay in your soil?
Keep the water from going.
All right, so hard-packed clay doesn't allow water penetration. If you try to dig a pond out of sand, what happens if you pour a bucket of water into the sand of the beach? It goes right through. So there are other types of pond that are built where the water table is really shallow, where you dig a hole in the ground and let it fill up with groundwater, and those are often sandy. But what we're talking about is clay or lined ponds, and this levee that is built with a specific slope to it. So you have the top of your levee, which you want to be able to drive around in a truck or larger equipment if that's what you need, and then the slope here is designed that you want some vegetation to hold it in place to keep it from washing away, but you don't want it to basically be able to harbor a lot of vegetation so that you can't harvest and you get a lot of aquatic vegetation. So and to keep it, if it's really high clay content, you can have it drop 1 foot for every 2 feet it goes out, and if it's decent but not really high clay, you need it to be 1 to 3. So it's a more shallow slope, the less clay you have, because the less it'll stick to itself, and so you can't have it as steep, it'll wash out. Erosion does happen, and so you have to maintain your ponds by coming back and repairing your levees. So this is what it looks like from the side view, the pond, and then if you have a canal or a ditch on the side, you need height differences because you want to use gravity as much as possible if you're moving water around the pond. And whenever you do anything that involves putting a pipe or anything through the levee, then you have an area where you can have leakage and seepage. All sorts of animals can also cause problems, muskrats, turtles, and stuff that burrow. So people that farm ponds often spend a lot of their time shooting these animals or just scaring them away with gunshots to keep them out of the way. So nowadays, with the fancy equipment that they have, there's laser-guided, GPS-driven tractors that can do all this to a high degree of precision, and they can build all these slopes and perfectly built levees. There's a couple different sort of strategies that you can use. You can either have it, that initial slope we saw where it was kind of all sloping down to one end, or you can crown it in the middle and have channels that run down the sides. And that's kind of what it looks like from the side view. So they call it the tide is basically where the groundwater is. And if you're trying to be able to fill it with your water and not have it fill up with groundwater, you have to understand where that water table is. It obviously changes a lot depending on rainfall. And so understanding the aquifer and where that water table is very important for being able to put it at the right point. Again, on your inflow, you're usually going to have some sort of screen on there. Sometimes it's a finer mesh bag. Sometimes it's just a large screen to keep fish out of there that might, be able to be predators. And so this is a place where you have to have the penetration through the pond levee to get water in and out. So they can be all kind of ditched canals, and then what a flashboard is, let's see if I have a picture of it. That's not a good one at all. Anyway, flashboard is basically a series of boards that you can put in to raise the height of at the inflow to control how fast water goes in or out. And so they call it an inflow gate. You got your canal that you basically can put these boards in or out to keep water in the canal, and then when you want it to flow through, you pull those boards out, and water will flow into the pond. This is a picture of what that gate or kind of ditch leading towards the pond will look like, and there's just basically a series of like 2x6s that you stack on top of each other in there. We're going to go through a lot of this fast, and we're going to go through several different ones. On the opposite end of the pond, you'll have what's called a harvest gate or a harvest basin, and this is an area where, again, you can control, see those slots in the concrete? That's where you slide the boards in to be able to keep water out, and then when you let water flow through, it drains the pond, and all the animals will eventually, usually they don't, the animals don't rush right out, they hold on to the end, and you basically rinse them in there, and then water goes out through the other end of this with again, through some sort of mesh screen, depending on how large of an animal you're trying to harvest. So building that in the side of a levee is actually a pretty big job. A lot of times, if it's not done when the pond's built, it's a big chore to come back in and do it. But you can do it when you're doing your levee maintenance or whatever. But it's a serious added cost in order to have that increased efficiency of harvest. So you saw what happens in that daily cycle of oxygen when you have algae growing in the pond, where you get times of low dissolved oxygen. That's your limiting factor on what you can produce, is your oxygen control. So, every time you have a low dissolved oxygen event, the most common thing to use is a paddle wheel aerator, and they come in different shapes and sizes, but they're basically things that spin around real fast and splash. And splashing the little droplets of water up into the air expose them to more surface area of water and air touching one another and increase oxygenation. There's also kind of air injection, kind of like an air stone that we have, where you can have big long tubes that run along the bottom of your pond and blow air into it that comes up into the water. So either blowing the water into the air with a paddle wheel or blowing air into the water. These are usually electric. They also have ones that are on the back of a tractor that you can just kind of back into a pond and turn it on the PTO of a tractor. And now what's becoming more and more common, we visited a hybrid striped bass farm up in Vanceboro this past year, and he now has a water quality monitoring float in the middle of his pond, and when it measures the DO reach a certain level, it will just turn the aerator on for him. So, like I said, driving around with a truck at 2 o'clock in the morning checking all the ponds, he doesn't have to do that anymore. When he sets the parameter, when it reaches that level, it kicks the thing on. The cost of that unit was kind of a lot, but in the long haul, it can save him all the electricity of running these units more often than he needs to. We were not going to talk about the details of like how much you can stock and everything like that right now. This is kind of what we were just talking about with the extra addition of more technology. You need electricity to each one. So in some cases, if you don't have clay, but you still want to have a larger scale production unit, you can install pond liners. And so this is made out of a rubber or plastic PVC type material, and you kind of dig the pond in the same way and stretch out this liner. And then a third way is kind of mixing a type of cement. So you kind of, and you basically create like a skim coat to create a clay-like surface that's not penetrable by water. So they tell you about ponds per acre. They're usually, ponds are, most larger scale catfish ponds are like 5 to 10 acres or even larger. Hybrid striped bass ponds are typically 2 to 3 acres. Some koi and other maybe higher value fish can be in even smaller ponds. So it really depends on what you're trying to push, and then that's how they calculate your production too, because if you own, however many thousand acres of property and you're going to convert it all to ponds, then you just need to know how much you can produce per acre. There is the word flounder on here, that for them it's not necessarily the volume or how much you feed, but because they just need area, bottom area, so they're not on top of one another. Alright, that's my pond overview. I'll do this.